Hello and welcome to this episode of Trash to Track. In this episode we're going to be looking at this little lifelike Atchison and Topeka and Santa Fe Railroad American switcher steam locomotive. This is a subscriber's model that was sent in to me for repair, as the loco didn't appear to run very well. So just giving it a quick dust there, I give it a quick battery test, and the loco is showing signs of life, but not very much. It's a very reluctant runner. There's a drill bit stuck to the magnet there, so that might have something to do with it. And again, it's another loco with these press on the wheels pickups, like the Kleinbahn Austrian loco we did before. To remove the body shell from the chassis, you have to remove this long flat bladed screw from the chimney, which also releases one of the body weights, and then the body comes off. Inside we find a motor that's not too dissimilar to the early Triang motors, and there's also a massive wiring for the light bulb that appears to go on the front there, but this was showing no signs of life, and I believe this is burnt out, so we'll look at replacing this later on. The cylinders there also come off, as they were attached with the body fixing screw. Now, giving the battery test again, you can see there is life in this model, so we should be able to resurrect it. Removing the base plate using these small cross-headed screws allows the whole wheel set to drop out, showing the pickup arrangement and motor arrangement. I'm not keen on this type of pickup, as it does tend to build up the crud from the rails on the back of the pickups there. Removing the other two screws here, this large one and the smaller one you can see in front of it, releases the motor from the chassis frame. Why it needed two screws to fix this small motor onto that chassis, I've got no idea. Over-engineered, I think, but there we go. The brush retaining spring is actually attached to the front of the motor there, and that's another strange arrangement I've not come across before. By releasing this, the brushes fall out, but as you can see, the massive wiring, we're going to need to remove some of this so I can service the motor properly. So I get out the soldering iron and unsolder a lot of the wires and free the motor up. As you can see, these brushes are a very strange arrangement, and getting spares for this, I believe, would be quite difficult. Bending up a Triang brush to look like that sort of shape would be extremely difficult. To clean the motor commutator faceplate there, usual method of meths and a cotton bud, and as you can see, this motor is absolutely caked in carbon deposits and crud. Just look at the state of that cotton bud. Once that's done, I'll give the commutator faceplate a gentle scrub with a fiberglass brush, just to remove the hard baked on carbon deposits there, and then I also get a shaved down toothpick and clean the gaps in the armature plate there, just to remove all the carbon build-up, which, as I've said before, can lead to poor running and even short circuits if it's left to build up too much. Once that's all been cleaned off, I give the brushes a good clean with cotton buds and meths, just to remove them carbon deposits there, and also polish the brush faces just so that it's all nice and clean when I put this back together. Just look at the amount of rubbish that's coming off this model. This has had some use over its lifetime. Because of the brush's strange shape, it took a while to get these back into the brush housing and onto the commutator. It took many times manipulating them with my needle nose pliers before they actually went back into place, and I was able to clip the spring around to hold them in place. This really was a fiddly job, but now they're back in place there, I'm going to give the motor a quick test with the battery now we've cleaned it all, just to make sure that everything's working. I also give the felt pads on this motor a good dousing of oil, as heaven knows when it was last lubricated, as it was completely dry when I stripped it down. Now, as you can see, giving it a quick battery test, the motor spins quite freely and nicely, and now I'll turn my attention to restoring the chassis of this model. This motor, considering its age, has got good magnetism and seems to have retained a lot of its power. Turning to the chassis and pickups, I'm going to first scrub off all the built up oxidisation and crud using my fiberglass pencil. I worked quite hard on this to remove all the crud and get the brass back to shining like new. Once that's done, I'm going to give it a quick clean up with a brasso and a cotton bud. it doesn't take too long of work to remove all the dirt off these pickups, and as you can see there, they're now starting to shine like a new pin and should conduct electricity better when we reassemble this model. I will also try and reshape these pickups to fit on the wheel profile a bit better, aiding in pickup later on. The chassis base plate itself, I just give a quick brush over to remove all the dust and fluff that's accumulated, as there's no lubrication present on this at all, so whether or not it has had any on it in the past, I'm unsure. There doesn't appear to be any dried up lubrication or grease on this whatsoever. The side rods of this model have got some surface oxidisation and rust, so using the brass brush in my Dremel, I work gently and remove all this by just allowing the brass brush to polish these parts up. Work gently as this metal is very thin and is bent very easily. So holding the parts in a variety of pliers, I work methodically and steadily until all the rust has been removed from all of these parts. Whilst the brass brush was in the Dremel, I also remove all the built up deposits that are present on the wheels. These really were caked in dirt, and it's no wonder it didn't work very well when we tried it with a battery test. You can see there in this speeded up footage just how shiny the wheels become after working with them with a few minutes with this brush in the Dremel there. After this was done, I polished the wheels up with a fiberglass pencil and a cotton bud with methylated spirits just to remove any of the oxidisation that's left over from the brass brush method. And it's surprising how much dirt comes off with the cotton bud. Now they're both polished up, as you can see there, they are shining like new. We can start to reassemble this model. And I first start by putting the motor back in the chassis frame there, using the 2 screws we removed earlier. Holding it in place and tightening the screw up, the motor is now sitting back where it should do. And we can start by refitting the wheels. I also reapply the side rods to the wheels, which are held in place with 2 tiny little flat bladed screws. Once the wheels are back in place, I'm going to reattach the keeper plate here on the bottom, and you can see there that it all lines up quite nicely, and these hold the wheels in place ready to reattach the cylinder blocks later on. The keeper plate is just held in place with 2 small Phillips head screws. The other screws that you can see through the keeper plate hold the motor in place, and the hole at the front there is the thread nut for the screw that comes through the chimney. Once that's all in place, I'm going to put the piston rods back in the cylinder blocks and reattach the cylinder blocks back to the front of the model. You have to work steadily here, as these are not fixed in until you put the screw through the chimney, so it's easy to reassemble them and then keep knocking them out, as I did whilst trying to reassemble this model. It was only a small model to work on, but there were some complex bits and pieces on this. Now that that's all back in place, I'm going to give it a quick test with the battery to make sure everything's running nicely. And as you can see there, the wheels are turning nicely now everything's been cleaned up. Although the front wheels don't pick up anything at all, so I'm going to have to adjust those pickups resting on the top of the wheel treads. I really don't like this design, as I've said before. I think they could have done a lot better with this. It seems a bit of an easy way out of this, and it doesn't always prove to be that reliable. Now we've adjusted them, the model is picking up from all 4 of its wheels. I've also replaced the bulb there with a Helgen spare that I had in stock, and we'll give that a quick test to make sure that's running, although it's out of shot here, but I can tell you that the light bulb actually now does work. So we can now put the body shell back on. This has been a relatively quick trash to track today, but they're not all complete rebuilds. This was basically just a service to get my friend's model back on the track. Putting the body shell on with the associated weight was quite a fiddly task, and it took several attempts to get it right. But once it was all seated correctly, it did clip on quite nicely, and then the screw was replaced through the chimney, and then ensuring that it engaged with the chassis keeper plate there to make sure that everything is held in firm. It took some time to line up the holes, and once they were in, it was a case of holding the model still while you tighten the screw up. Now I'm going to use a controller on this short length of track here just to give it a battery test, and the controller, as you can see, was already left on. But now this loco is running quite nicely. I didn't use the battery to test it on its final rebuild, as this motor seemed to take a lot of current and it was drawing the battery down, and I didn't want it to go entirely flat. Let's have a look at what we started with this model. It was covered in dust and it was a complete non-runner due to the fact that the wheels had got covered in carbon and oxidisation, and the side rods were all oxidised with rust. We removed all the rust and cleaned all the wheels and serviced the motor, and now this little tiny switcher locomotive is back to riding the rails once again. As I said, it's only a short trash to track this time, so I appreciate you watching. If you've got an engine you'd like repaired or featured on Trash to Track, please contact me on dansmodelrailways@gmail.com, and we'll look into getting it sent over for possible repair and feature in a future episode. Thanks again for watching. The next Trash to Track is slightly longer than 12 minutes, but like I said, they can't all be epic movie length rebuilds. This one was a relatively simple one, which after a few of the rebuilds we've done lately, provided to be a refreshing change. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you again in the next one. Bye for now.